the narrowness of Jesus. Narrow is the road. Matthew 7:14. Let's consider the focus of Jesus. I know it's seen as a negative word nowadays and can harm someone's reputation. We often hear it used in a bad way, and sometimes we use it ourselves. We say, oh yes, he is narrow, meaning that one aspect of his character has been limited or harmed. His mind is not broad or well-rounded. His heart is not fully developed. He is a small and stunted person, held back by a lack of education or restricted by his surroundings. However, the man from Galilee was not narrow in this negative sense. But what word better describes one of Jesus' noticeable qualities than narrowness? He set clear boundaries for himself. He confined himself within specific limits. In this way, he was narrow. How limited was the area in which he did all his work? He lived his life in Palestine, a small country about the size of Connecticut. It was not an important country either, but just a small province under mighty Rome. It didn't stand out in the eyes of the world, and the influential people in the world's capitals knew little about it and cared even less. It was an unknown and rural country, small in size and unremarkable in reputation. Yet, the Prince of Glory chose to confine himself to this small corner of the world. He could have traveled around the world like many famous teachers had done before him. He could have taught in Athens and spoken in the streets of the eternal city. He could have shared his message with a wide range of people whose influence spanned many lands. But instead, he chose to stay at home, to devote his time to the cities of Galilee, to focus his efforts on the villages of Judea. For 30 years, he remained in the humble obscurity of a carpenter's shop, and the region where he poured out his knowledge and love was just a carpenter's shop among the grand palaces of the world. If his field was limited, then so was the scope of his work. He focused on one specific task, ignoring the many other good things he could have done as a righteous man in Palestine. People couldn't understand his narrow focus and constantly urged him to pursue grander endeavors that would create a bigger impact. One day, someone interrupted him while he was speaking, demanding that he settle a dispute over an inheritance. But he refused, stating that it was not his responsibility, and instead invited the person to listen to his teachings. While the request was noble, it wasn't the work that Christ believed his heavenly Father had assigned him. He understood that one person cannot do everything and set limits to his actions. His brothers once wanted him to go to Jerusalem to impress important people there, but he declined, explaining that he could only go when it was time and when his work compelled him to do so. Despite attempts to divert him, he remained steadfast in his decision to go to Jerusalem. He knew he had a mission to fulfill, and he couldn't deviate until it was accomplished. He always spoke as if he were walking a narrow path, while others enjoyed the freedom of broader roads. He couldn't waste his energy or time and had to remain focused on his mission, as it was the only way to bring joy and salvation to the world. When he spoke about the two paths, one narrow and the other broad, he spoke from personal experience. He urged others to follow the narrow path because he himself had chosen it. In the realm of intellect, he also chose the narrow path. Today, it is often advised not to limit oneself to a single religion or belief system. It is considered better to be open to all ideas and truths that come our way. However, Jesus of Nazareth did not agree with this philosophy. He believed certain conceptions of God, humanity, and duty to be true, while others were false. He held on to the truth with his entire being and fought against falsehood. He never hesitated to express his opinions boldly and vigorously. He was not afraid of being called intolerant or a bigot. He made a clear distinction between truth and falsehood, rejecting errors and proclaiming the truth, regardless of who held opposing views. In modern times, many would consider him narrow-minded because he didn't compromise or waver in his beliefs. He persistently stood up for what he knew to be true and good. If being dogmatic means being confident and resolute, then he was the most dogmatic teacher. He confidently dismissed other leaders and teachers, declaring, "Others have taught you this or that, but I tell you." His boldness even placed him above Moses and the prophets in the eyes of his astonished followers. He didn't allow his followers to wander aimlessly. He came to bear witness to the truth, and for that reason, he was not broad enough to put up with falsehood. This same narrowness is evident again in the limited range of his praises. He could commend some things, but he was obligated to condemn others. There were men he could praise, and there were other men who deserved harsh criticism. He didn't always smile and treat everyone the same. He made distinctions and taught others to do the same. Some people have a weak and sentimental way of grouping all men together, making them seem alike. Jesus, however, had a keen sense of discernment. He could see beyond the surface of people's hearts and judge them fearlessly, which made them fearful in his presence. He drove out a gang of thieves from the temple, leaving them bewildered and alarmed. He even called some influential men in Jerusalem fools, blind men, serpents, and vipers. There was a great divide between certain individuals. Jesus didn't downplay the seriousness of sin by treating all men equally. While it may not matter to some of us whether people are honest or live immoral lives, it mattered to Jesus. No despicable scoundrel could feel good about themselves in Jesus' presence. He was so strict in his judgments that he refused to let bad men believe they were good. In all his assessments of people's lives and homes, he followed a narrow path. In his tendency to make distinctions and set boundaries, we can find the reasons for many things that might otherwise be hard to understand. One of the defining characteristics of Jesus' life was his joy. Despite being familiar with grief, his joy was immeasurable. He had so much of it that he could pass it on to his disciples. Could he have been happy if he hadn't operated within narrow limits? What period in a person's life is as miserable as the late teens or early 20s when one doesn't know what they're going to do? The vast world lies before them with countless possibilities, and a young person full of energy and ambition, capable of doing numerous things, feels wretched. There are countless doors they could open, but they don't know which one to choose. There are numerous fields in which they could invest their strength, but they can't decide which one to pursue. They feel confident they could lead 100 different endeavors to victory, but they struggle to determine which one is most deserving of their leadership. Such a youth is the most miserable of all. No one can be truly happy with the whole world to explore. It is only when a person selects a specific small sphere and declares, "I will focus on this," that real life begins, and their heart learns to sing. When the world's work appears as an overwhelming mass, there is only sadness and hopelessness. But when a person takes a defined, small task in their hand and says, "This is what I will dedicate my life to," the shadows disappear and life becomes meaningful. The narrow path leads to life. Jesus had a clear purpose. At the age of 12, he knew the calling he must fulfill and never allowed himself to be swayed into doing something else. This is where we often make mistakes, and it is the root cause of much of the unrest in our souls. We start a certain task, and immediately people start saying, "Why don't you do this?" or "Come and do this." Before we know it, we have wasted our energy trying to do things that God never intended us to do. This is also where we make mistakes in our acts of kindness. We try to contribute to too many causes, resulting in little joy from our giving. It is not our duty to donate to every good cause that comes our way. It is only when we set limits on our giving that we become what God likes to see, cheerful givers. If you want to find someone who sings while working, look for them within a narrow circle. Jesus was not only happy, but he was also powerful. He left a strong impression by staying in one place and consistently emphasizing his message. If he had traveled around the world, more people would have heard his parables, but they may not have been as deeply affected. By staying in Palestine and connecting with a select group of individuals, he gained influence to the point where the authorities became afraid that he would disrupt the nation. Those closest to him loved him so much that they were willing to die for him. He became powerful by limiting himself. This can be compared to rivers. A river only becomes a river with the help of its banks. A swamp, on the other hand, has no banks. If you remove the banks, the river becomes a swamp. Many rivers become stronger and more majestic when mountains surround them. When left to spread over plains, the river becomes shallow, muddy, and weak. But when the mountains press in, narrowing its path and forcing the waters to flow more forcefully, the river gains depth and strength. It becomes capable of powering mills and transporting ships. In times of distress, When our lives are squeezed into a narrower channel, we often find new richness and meaning. Our Lord succeeded by limiting himself. Success means doing what we were created to do. Failure to do what is most worthwhile is the most frustrating experience. Jesus' goal was to complete the work his Father had given him. At the end of his life, he could confidently say that he had finished that work. It was time for the Father to glorify the Son. Jesus accomplished an incredible amount in just 33 years. It's amazing what can be achieved in a short time if one is committed. We shouldn't mourn excessively when lives are cut short. Instead of aiming for a long life, we should focus on doing our work. If we accomplish our purpose, why should we lament if we die early? We have touched on a significant principle that applies to all the fine arts. These arts become exceptional because of the strict limitations they impose. They require discipline and adherence to specific rules. In music, for example, singers must be precise and accurate. They cannot sing slightly off-key and still produce beautiful music. Artists cannot freely choose colors for their paintings. They must follow rules to create a masterpiece. Poetry is even more challenging than prose because it demands stricter discipline. Poets must adhere to rules of rhythm and melody. Living as God desires is the most difficult fine art. It is more demanding than singing or painting. We cannot think, feel, or act however we want. We must walk the narrow path. Jesus walked this path, and he calls everyone to follow him. He is strict in his expectations and commands. He imposes limitations. He says, "Come to me." We may ask if we can go to others, but he replies that there are no others. We must come to him. When we do, he tells us to follow me. We may hesitate and wonder if there is an easier way, but he insists on following him. He says that we cannot be his disciples unless we take up our cross and follow him. He is the only way to the Father. He says, "Abide in me." We may hesitate and question if it is necessary to confine ourselves to what seems like a small space, but he tells us in his strong and convincing tone, like the one that inspired people long ago in Galilee, "Truly I tell you, if you don't stay connected to me, you won't have any life in you." This is why Jesus seems limited. He chose to restrict himself, giving up his divine glory, and took on a human form. He walked the narrow path from the carpenter's shop to Golgotha because he loved us greatly. He did all this so that each one of us could have a full and abundant life.